Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to show the most common mistakes I have made with focus. In other words, with obtaining a clear image using the technique of close focus wide angle. Hopefully, by looking at some of the mistakes I've made, you can learn from my mistakes, shorten your learning curve, and take better pictures yourself with your underwater photography. Let's check it out. Poor focus mistake number 1, not focusing on the foreground subject. With close focus wide angle, I focus on the near subject for two reasons. First, the near subject is most interesting in what we want to highlight, and depth of field is generally greater behind the plane of focus than in front. So we can still get the background somewhat clear. What happened here? I pointed my camera directly at the near subject, the scorpionfish, and auto-focused on it with spot center focus. However, I then moved my camera a little bit to recompose the image such that the scorpionfish was at the lower portion of the image in order to show the background subject, the diver. The problem is, my camera refocused on the diver, resulting in a very blurred scorpionfish. What I must remember to do is focus on the near subject, the scorpionfish, then lock my focus on the scorpionfish before moving my camera to recompose my image. I did this here, and now the scorpionfish is very clear, and the diver is not too bad because of the good depth of field, better depth of field we have behind the subject. Sharp image mistake number 2, aperture too large, resulting in a blurred background image. In this image, I locked my focus on the coral in the foreground, then moved my camera slightly to show my dive buddy in the background. I was shooting available light in aperture priority mode, which I usually do without a strobe, but I forgot to make my aperture smaller. My camera was set to the widest aperture at 1.8. I had very little depth of field even with my compact camera, and the dive buddy in the background was very blurred. Remember, with close focus wide angle, we need a smaller aperture to keep higher depth of field. I changed my aperture to a much smaller aperture, f11, resulting in much better depth of field. Now the coral in the foreground is clear, and the diver in the background is fairly sharp too, due to better depth of field. You can even see part of the dive boat. I increased my ISO from 100 to 800 to keep a fast shutter speed of 1/640th of a second and avoid motion blur, which leads me to the final mistake with focus. Remember, the first one is not focusing on the foreground subject and locking our focus. The second mistake is the aperture being too large, resulting in a blurred background image. The last one is motion blur. Okay? In this available light shot, I locked my focus on the foreground subject, but the entire image is blurred. Why? I had a small aperture to maintain good depth of field, but in low lighting with available light, the shutter speed was very slow, only 1/5 of a second, and marked motion blur resulted. The subject were fairly stationary, but I'm sure I moved a little bit while the shutter was open. I should have checked my shutter speed on my camera's LCD information, and I would have known that 1/5 of a second was way too slow, and I could have increased my ISO to obtain a good exposure with a fast shutter speed to stop the action. And by the way, if you're using a strobe, a blurred foreground image from motion blur is less of a problem because the flash from the strobe generally stops the action. However, we still do have to focus on the near subject. Hopefully, by looking at some of these mistakes that I have made, you'll be able to avoid these mistakes and get better pictures with your own underwater photography. Thanks a lot for tuning in.